join us on this stage, Florencio Papello. He's the Economic and Commercial Advisor of Mozambique Embassy in Portugal. Hi, how you doing? António Jorge Costa, General Supervisor, Board Member of Visa Beira Group. António Ribeiro, CEO of Africa Proof, Portugal. Luís Cunha, Managing Partner of McKinsey & Company Africa, Morocco. And last but not least, Mr. Seyi Kumpayai, Executive Director of Access Bank, Nigeria. Please join us. We don't have much time, so let's make the most of it. So, Mr. Florencio, I'll start with you. We've heard two very interesting interventions here, and there's a lot of talk for the longest time about Africa and EU trades, but still there seems to it just doesn't happen. Not much is happening. So, what's preventing things from happening, and what makes doing business between these two blocks so difficult, apparently difficult?
So thank you very much. Muito obrigado. So one word before. I am Portuguese project defender in the world. So I will speak in Portuguese.
Please do.
So if you allowed me, please.
Of course. Fala em português à vontade. Todos
Muito
entendemos.
obrigado. Obrigado a todos. Obrigado à moderadora. Ora bem, a questão que me coloca, de facto, nós vamos começar assim. Nós reconhecemos que a União Europeia é o parceiro principal da África. E sobretudo para Moçambique. Nós temos dados, temos fatos que, portanto, trazem-nos evidências de que a União Europeia é o nosso melhor parceiro até agora. Contudo, temos também consciência que existem desafios e existem alguns elementos que ainda dificultam que esta parceria seja ainda muito melhor. Primeiro, é preciso olhar para a África com as suas disparidades. Esse é um dos primeiros pontos que é preciso salientar, porque a África ela não é toda uno em termos de países e isto faz com que, às vezes, esse tratamento traga alguma dificuldade na nossa relação comercial.
Mas a União Europeia também é um grupo de muitos países com muitas distinções, então devia haver uma compreensão melhor, não?
É verdade, mas a diferença qual é? É que a União Europeia, como a Rita dizia muito bem, e também o Pimenta, tem regras. As regras são muito unas.
São comuns.
Deixa-me só dar um exemplo, por exemplo. O regulamento da desflorestação e da chamada degradação florestal. Esse é um regulamento da União Europeia. E que, olhando para os países africanos, grande parte dos países africanos, incluindo Moçambique, a sua produção é nas condições de deflorestação e de degradação ambiental. Então, a implementação destes regulamentos, imagina a dificuldade que vai trazer para que os países africanos exportem para a Europa. Então, este é um ponto muito concreto. Então, é preciso que a União Europeia, trabalhe com a África, com os países, no âmbito do Acordo do Cotonou e no âmbito dos acordos bilaterais, para que, este regulamento seja implementado olhando para as especificidades de cada país e, dois, para vermos como é que nós a seguimos. Dois, nestas especificidades é preciso olhar que a África, desde há muito tempo, ainda estamos a tentar ultrapassar, exporta basicamente produtos chamados aqueles base. Soja...
Sem valor acrescentado.
Sem valor acrescentado. Ainda continuamos com esse desafio. Então, eu penso que é um desafio nessa relação África e União Europeia para que a União Europeia ajude, portanto, os países africanos a ultrapassarem isto. Moçambique tem um exemplo muito concreto, deixa-me só citar isso. Nós iniciamos agora a implementação de um programa chamado PRONAI. O PRONAI é Programa Nacional de Industrialização. Ele visa essencialmente passar para, vamos dizer, transitar para a industrialização, na verdade, do país. E o foco principal é a transformação dos produtos agrícolas. Portanto, dar-lhes um valor acrescentado. E acreditamos que nesta linha estaremos em condições de podermos exportar mais para a União Europeia. 3. Há questões básicas como, e que precisamos muito da União Europeia para melhorar essa relação. Alguns produtores e algumas fábricas em África têm um problema de certificação. E este problema de certificação é sério. Então, por causa desse problema, tem dificuldade de exportar ou de dar entrada aos seus produtos na União Europeia. Há problemas de digitalização e comércio eletrônico. Nós precisamos disso. E, em algum momento, precisamos também do apoio, da boa relação com a União Europeia. E 3, como foi bem dito, nós já agora em África, com o acordo livre, portanto, de comércio internacional, esperamos que a União Europeia nos apoie mais para a implementação deste acordo, porque ele provavelmente poderá constituir uma alavanca, poderá constituir uma saída para o comércio entre Europa e África. Portanto, são alguns exemplos que podia citar muitos outros tantos, mas há que incrementar o comércio entre Europa e África, sobretudo nesta componente de melhoramento dos regulamentos, para vermos como é que nós melhor implementamos, para que, de facto, os nossos produtos tenham mais acesso, melhor acesso ao mercado europeu. Obrigado.
So, better regulation, certification, increased value, those are some of the issues that Florencio Papello has enhanced. Visibeira is a Portuguese company with 2 decades of experience in countries such as Mozambique. Do you have the same vision as Mr. Florencio Papello? What could enhance the economic growth and the growth of bilateral trades between the Europe continent and the African continent within all its differences and specificities?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Joanna, and thank you for the invitation also. Yes, I share, as a Mozambican citizen also, I share what Florencio says. It's a long story. In my experience, after 48 years, the independence, since the first moments of the independence, the ideal, in the case of Mozambique, the ideal position is to export, to increase the exports, to put the national products abroad. And alongside of these 48 years, most of this has not been possible to realize due lots of things, due to the roles also. In the meantime, EU has consolidated is reality, but as has been said by Florencio, there are not situations so unanimous in Africa as in Europe. Each country is a different reality. Usually
actually, a
the people,
continent, isn't it? Sometimes.
Usually the people says Africa, but Africa, it's a lot of different countries with different experience, with a different history, and this history implements also inside of the country some historical roles, some procedures, and so on. Then there are long processes, and in my opinion, is absolutely definitive that we increase the production and the transformation of the products. We cannot be for all times the eternal exporter of commodities. We need to improve the industrialization. I remember that in the first constitution of Mozambique, and in the actual also a reference to this, says that the agriculture is the base of our development, and the industry is a factor of dynamization. And after 48 years, we have not this factor of the dynamization improving. Maybe in comparison, what is the reality in 1975, we have lower industrialization, and we are importing so much products that use the raw materials that we have in the country. Then, definitively, I think that the relation between EU and Africa or African countries must be also to support this industrialization in the more effective way.
And could this be, Antonio Ribeiro, an opportunity, since we're facing extreme difficulties, specifically in agricultural matters, such as the cereal crisis? Could this be a chance for Europe to look at Africa and enhance these trades by promoting the country, as well as fulfilling some needs that we have here and that are now in serious difficulties? And what role does technology play in all this?
Okay.
Like 5 questions in one.
Yeah, at least. Thank you, Joanna. First of all, thank you, EurAfrican Forum and the Diáspora Council for keeping this event and keeping the consistency and perseverance to achieve this huge goal that is our drive here. Also, thank you for the invitation and to invite ProF to be here. It's an honor to represent and to be present in the event. ProF is a company that dedicates itself, it's an engineering company that dedicates itself to the implementation of power and telecom networks or grids. Focuses itself on not only on the transmission and distribution of power, but also on renewables. So a lot of subjects have been touched already in this forum, and I do agree with some of the comments we did already here, but trying to come back to your question as much as possible, because time is not much. So how can we, in fact, use that potential, right? A huge job has been done, and already at the EU level and the African Union, to create those ingredients or those conditions that we've been discussing here. We cannot change stability of a country at once. So, and that doesn't give us to the enabling entities enough conditions yet to accelerate some of those situations, as you mentioned very well, that could help, in fact, the rest of the world having the production already starting or being more active in Africa and using Africa as a supply of those needs, let's say. But for me, and for the experience, based on the experience I have, there are 2 big pillars where Africa can really, despite the help that it needs, due to the diversity of regulation, diversity of cultural, etc. There are 2 pillars that are transversal, I would say. One is the industrialization, clearly. The other one is education. Because it is a long run, yes. It doesn't happen in 1 year. But we need, in order for us to use that potential, if we look at just at demographics, in comparison between the continents, the potential is there. In that sense, we need that skill, that upskilling of all those communities, of all those countries, because it's just astonishing, the amount, the potential that we can unlock, and then that will drive, of course, all the other key pillars that we've been discussing, right? It's not the only one, but it's one, in my view, that is key. And the answer, it's not straight. Because unfortunately, and sorry about
Never
going
is.
around,
it would be easy
it's not straight, right? It would be very easy then. But I think what we must do is continue this path with as much energy as we can, and it has to start bottom up, clearly. Africa has a huge role in this path. And from the EU side, there's a lot of experience already. There's a lot of challenges that were overcome, and those experience can accelerate the curve and can reduce the timing to achieve this common goal. Then in terms of sustainability, such a buzzword, everything is sustainable. I think my mother also knows, and it was a good example. But in fact, when we look into Africa in any of the projects that we do, what we should do is exporting our best policies and implement those in those projects when possible, of course. We must not drive out of the environment of a certain African country because it is like it is. You should help moving towards a certain direction, but you cannot move it again in a short period of time. So implement that in those projects, bring all those best practices, and turn it as much circular as possible. Use the raw materials from the country, use the productions that exist, complement with others, but take benefit of that and be as sustainable as possible in implementing those projects. And that's my contribution.
It's what Antonio was saying is much like just leaving the seed that will help develop, just water the plants and everything will grow. There are some good examples. How can these good examples, especially in organizations and international institutions, help implement better procedures in order to just skip the worst steps? Because with the industrialization, we've had some very bad steps that we're paying the price now. So with the goal of sustainability and development close together, what role do good examples have in the happening of change, and especially in cutting some of the phases that we are not interested in having?
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. This is my first time in this conference, and I think I found it very, very interesting and very topical in terms of what is being discussed. And I work for Access Bank. We're the largest bank in Nigeria. We have about 60 million customers, and we are in 15 African countries, including Angola, where we just completed a transaction, as well as Mozambique. We sit in a very vantage point because we're a bank, and therefore part of our role is also to support economic development. Sometimes our balance sheets, don't allow us to do it on time as well as we should. So today, over the last 18 years, we've been able to, working with international banks, DFIs, bring into Africa about $1.5 billion. So the likes of KFW, DG, FMO, FinFund, BIO, IFC. So that we've been able to do, and this is to support many things: SME, women development, health, education, sustainable development, climate change, across. And these are funds, that help in a longer term. So they are not, some of them are trade lines, but most of them are really about financing long-term need, of the economy. So I think for us, we sit in a vantage point. And we're not just doing it in Nigeria, we're also doing it across Africa. So we're working with even local developmental agencies in those countries to look for the funding, because our view is that Africa, must develop itself. Africa cannot continue to cry for handout. Africa must find within itself, that capability. I mean, it's been said here, we have very young population. We have enormous opportunity. We are not adding so much value. A lot of, yes, we do commodities, but that is changing. But so clearly for me, there are a number of unions that we've seen that can support, I think one of the best things that's happened in Africa is really the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is started. We are working with them in one of the initiatives around, this is the Pan-African Payment System, where, because at the end of the day, trade is also the settlement that follows. So part of the challenge of African trade is about, this is somebody in Accra wants to do business with somebody in Lagos. How does that happen? What's in the middle? What's going to ensure that that trade, because there's an issue of trust. So the Africa...
It's not easy because Africa is separated from coast to coast.
It's very complex. And the work that I do, I look after the African subsidiaries, and I move around quite a bit. I go to practically been to all of the 14 African countries. And therefore, what I see is that there is complexity. Each country is different. Each region is different. West Africa is completely different from Southern Africa. East Africa, the Lusophone is also completely different. So the complexities of the environments are different. And therefore, the strategy that you apply, how you raise money, what you do with the money, who you apply it to, are completely different depending on what you're trying to do. So for me, yes, there's something that we've learned. And working with international agencies has allowed us to better the procedures that we use internally, even from a governance standpoint. All right, what do we need to do? And it's also allowed us to take on the sustainability issues very, very quickly in a career. We worked with IFC to develop a sustainable framework. We actually have a green bond that's listed on the Luxembourg Exchange. So we moved quite a bit further on just because of we were trying to raise money, but part of the raising money is, okay, let's understand what you're doing with sustainability, what you're doing with climate change, how are you financing this, how are you greening your book, what are the level of emissions that you have within your system. So I think for us, that has helped. And that partnership working with the lots of the international agencies has allowed us move further, allowed better procedures for us, and allowed better governance.
But do you think that international organizations should be more open to the African contribution, like not trying to implement what they bring from abroad and listen to the people on the terrain to see how things can adjust better?
Definitely, because the reality is there's nothing like one size fits all. And there is something that says that seek to understand before being understood. If you don't do that, then there will be no movement. So I think as Europeans, you have to understand, okay, what are the complexities and peculiarities of each country? Because it's not, it's one continent, but it's not one country. It's a very diverse and complex environment. So it's to understand, okay, you can even do it regionally, because sometimes if you do regionally, you get a bit of a view. East Africa is very close in terms of Southern Africa, very close, Lesotho, very close. So let me even take it on a regional, and let me understand the peculiarities of each country, of each region, and then I can then apply, okay, this is what I want to do, what's the best way to do it, taking knowledge and understanding from the local market and the local nuances of each of those areas.
So Luis, you have to understand the local nuances. That's perfect. It makes sense, but still you have to comply for a series of international regulations. There's a lot of legal barriers. So how can you make this work within all these different with these different shades?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you again for the invitation. I know when we talk about in Africa internationalization, the barriers are the first thing that come to mind. The difficulties, the regulation. But I wanted to start with a positive or a vision of hope. Right now, and I know that most of the audience is Portuguese, and I know in Portugal we are very much focused on the Lusophone, Angola, Mozambique, but Africa, as mentioned here, is far beyond that. And we already observe in many sectors already African corporates, homegrown African corporates, not Siemens, Coke, whatever, African corporates operating across the continent. So they were able to do that. I'll give you a couple of examples. You have in telecom, have MTN, South African case, 200 million clients in the continent. This, Vodacom, another one. That this one actually owned by Vodafone, but the group Vodacom, MultiChoice in entertainment. Those of us that go to Angola, you do see MultiChoice there. Guess what? It operates across the globe with the South African owned and the South African homegrown company. even mentioning what's happening is actually quite interesting. What's happening now in financial services in the continent. Sergio just mentioned, and it's true, that a lot of the international players are stepping out of Africa. Mostly European, BNP Paribas, Barclays, Standard Chartered. They are stepping out. We can get into the reasons, but that's beyond the point now. The fact is they are stepping out. And who's stepping in? It's not like some Chinese bank. It's not like some Gulf from the bank, some from Riyadh or whatever. Nothing like that. It is African banks that are expanding. And Shay can talk about Access Bank experience, like in whatever, 2 years, you've expanded how many markets? How many? 6 in 1 year, boom, 6 markets. If you see the Moroccan banks, they are in 18 markets. You see Standard Bank, it's like, 40 markets. I don't know if Liz is here, he can talk to us about that. So there is a massive movement from the financial services industry in Africa to actually build Pan-African business. So I just think that, we talk about the difficulties and all of that, but, it's possible. It's possible, and these entities, they have done that. Now, this was the thing of hope.
That was a good part, the silver lining.
No, but there is something that I wish to also mention, that it has not been mentioned a lot, that I'm worried with my continent. I call it my continent because I live in Africa now for 10 years, close to 10 years. That we might be left behind in this new world. I'll be now a little bit negative and exploring some of the things that were said earlier on, which is, you were talking, someone's grandmother knew about ESG, transition, all of that stuff. But it's actually becoming real, and the ambassador mentioned, Rogério mentioned, the pressures that we have these days to decarbonize and only to accept goods that have a certain footprint, so on and so forth. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So this is not the long term, all of that is right. Because on the long term, more trade, more income, people getting out of poverty, that's fantastic. Now, the problem is, as Kine said, that in the long term, we are all dead. So it's like, the next 10 years, 20 years, that's what really matters. And if nothing is done, I actually fear for Africa. I'll give you just a couple of examples. You see, probably one of the most important commodities that the continent sells, it's actually oil. And if you think all of the decarbonization, we estimate in McKinsey that the demand for oil, if you think 20 years, is going to go down. It's going to go down probably 40, 50%. Guess that Africa produces, we are actually on the high part of the cost of producing oil, and therefore probably 80% of Africa's oil production will be uncompetitive. If you just mentioned the border carbon taxes, if that is applied, when that is going to be applied, because it will apply, when that's going to be applied, you take, for instance, South African mining, which is not oil, a very important industry. South African gold cost, because these underground mines and because they are powered, 80% by coal, their price is going to go up by 17%, more or less. So probably have an industry that's going to be uncompetitive. But between these two, we are talking about $200 billion of revenue that every year accrue to the continent that will be in danger in the next decades or so. So I do think that something needs to change, and Europe, we can then, if you're of interest, we can talk about what can be done to avoid this. But in fact, the direction that the continent will take is actually not the most positive one in those regards, trading and some of the most important things that the continent trades.
So, Florencio, o que é que pode então ser feito para evitar isto? Que instrumentos é que podem ser reforçados para se atingir estes objetivos de substituição, no fundo, daquilo que é a base da economia em muitos países africanos, por exportações, no fundo, que é o que nós queremos. Nós queremos que a África se desenvolva o suficiente para conseguir entrar para subir à primeira divisão e passar a ser um país exportador, produtor e exportador com mais-valia.
Okay, muito obrigado. Bom, penso que são 3 coisas fundamentais. Primeiro, melhorar a relação entre a União Europeia e os países africanos. Nesta linha que eu dizia, portanto, considerar que cada país é um país, os países não são todos iguais, há diferenças no tratamento, há diferenças na capacidade de fazer isto e aquilo. 2, é uma questão fundamental. Temos que olhar um pouco para as questões de alterações climáticas, porque há muitas empresas que já estão a produzir, como dizia meu Luís, em África, mas estas empresas precisam de mais assistência. Portanto, a relação aqui Europa-África tem que ser mais assistência ao que está lá, não no sentido de fazer igual o que se faz cá, mas assistir aos países lá, para que consigam fazer, sobretudo as empresas que já produzem, e algumas até produzem em condições favoráveis ao meio ambiente. E isto vai trazer vantagens, não só para aqueles países, para aquelas empresas, mas também para esta exportação, este processo de exportação, que nós todos queremos. E, finalmente, é preciso olhar a um assunto que eu queria aqui aproveitar, não sei se vamos ter tempo ainda. Nós estamos, neste momento, com a crise, digamos, de cereais no mundo. Portanto, porque muitos dos países, sobretudo do Corno de África, vêm se beneficiando dos cereais da Ucrânia e da Rússia. Com esta interrupção da cadeia de fornecimento, isto é um problema sério. É um problema sério. Então, é preciso...
Mas pode ser uma oportunidade.
É exatamente aí onde eu queria chegar. Portanto, temos que encontrar formas, na relação também com a União Europeia, que consigamos ter, dentro das condições até que a própria União Europeia coloca, portanto, podermos ver se há condições de produzirmos mais em África. Em vez de esperarmos por um cereal que nunca mais vai chegar, então temos que usar aquilo que é a nossa capacidade e as condições que nós temos em África. Então, transformar nesta crise numa oportunidade. E é preciso fazer isso. E, finalmente, é preciso que a União Europeia ajude a alguns países africanos, sobretudo os mais afetados pelos efeitos das mudanças climáticas, sobretudo na mobilização de financiamentos. Porque eu digo isso com muito conhecimento de causa. Moçambique, como todos sabem, que estão aqui presentes, é um dos países que mais sofre portanto, com os impactos das alterações climáticas. Nós, há 2 anos, tivemos uma cidade quase destruída, a cidade da Beira, e este ano tivemos ainda mais um ciclone, o Fred, que também destruiu mais uma outra cidade, a Climane.
Destruiu uma série de culturas também.
Culturas, para além das mortes, que nem quero falar. Então, é preciso olhar para esta componente, Portanto, penso eu que a questão de mobilização de financiamentos para a construção de infraestruturas resilientes às alterações climáticas é muito importante. Nós sabemos que o dinheiro existe e a União Europeia tem o dinheiro. Agora, é preciso vermos como é que nós chegamos a esse dinheiro. Portanto, reitero que a União Europeia, na nossa relação que existe, que ajude também a encontrar formas ou a mobilizar melhor financiamentos para a construção de infraestruturas resilientes. Portanto, há um caminho longo, são desafios enormes, mas há condições, fazendo uso dessa relação secular que existe entre a África e a União Europeia, para que sigamos para frente. Obrigado.
António, how can we hasten all these spaces that we have to give in order to make everything happen in 10 years, in a 10-year horizon? Because we have to educate, we have to change the whole economy, we have to build infrastructures, we have to combat the climate changes, without leaving people with something to eat, because at the end of the day, if you don't have anything to eat, you will not be thinking about the flood that's coming next winter. So how can we hasten all these spaces?
It's a 1 million question. In 1980, Mozambique has approved a program at that time named the PPI, in which we are thinking that in 10 years will be solved all of the most our problems. But unfortunately, we'll arrive at the end of the 10 years and the problems are worse. I think that the first thing is work. And it's necessary work. Everybody needs to assume this perspective that it's necessary work hard in order to reach the main targets. The second one is education. As been said here, education is essential. We have now around 32 million inhabitants, and 50% of this population is lower than 15 years. The only way is to prepare these people for the life. Is to have national perspective also how to answer to the floods, not only after the events, but before the events occur. Because we know, every scientist says that in the next years, the real effects of the climate change will affect the country. And it's necessary to prevent. It's necessary to prevent in order that the cultures and the populations are safe. And I don't foresee any other way if not we work hard. Everybody, every organization, also the international organizations, the national side, the entrepreneurs, the local entrepreneurs, the entrepreneurs that came from abroad and they intend to participate in the project of the development of the country, there are no other way. Work.
You have to build careers and better salaries and perspectives to convince people that they have a future and that they need to build for that future.
But for this, it's necessary work. The better salaries can come only if you produce. There are no better sellers if you don't produce. There are no, if you have not return of the investments, there are no investors that can do things, invest, if they have no return of the investment. With the actual international inflation, with the bank rates increasing, it's quite difficult. The situation in Mozambique, we saw for the bank rates, and it's impossible an economy grows with this pressure. Because if you have not this perspective that everybody in his post, in his job, work hard in order to change the real situation, it's quite difficult to go ahead. And I believe that this is possible. It's not a
but we have to just stop wishful
mission.
thinking and just making things change. António Ribeiro, could the European most ambitious sustainable goals be an opportunity or another difficulty in this equation? Since if you don't step up to those barriers that are established, you will not be able to export and to produce to European countries. So, where do you see that hanging?
Okay, thank you again, Joanna. We've been discussing a lot around that, in fact, in the forum, and also allowed me to learn a lot. But from our perspective, we've been present in various countries in Africa. Morocco, Angola, Mozambique, South Africa, Namibia, Rwanda, Djibouti, implementing projects in those countries. And that learning helps us understanding those cultural differences and the way of living in each, and the various issues that certain countries have. And again, it's not the same in all of them. But I've seen also things happening in Africa very fast. And it gives me confidence that Africa, in fact, can do it. There's, again, it's not the same in every country, but going from 8 to 80 in Africa is something that is possible. Why? There's ambition, There's energy, in fact, energy not in the sense of power, but in the sense of people.
Well, free energy.
There's also a lot of information from what happened around the world, right? So that learning curve is much faster, or can be. I can see that there's a lot of enabling. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we were not talking about the same availability of money. We were not talking about the same level of programs already in between EU and African Union, for instance, and other bodies, right? So, yes, I have no doubt that every single project or every single investment will have to respect the ecosystem that is built. So it will have to go into those rules. Otherwise, it will, as it was said before by Luis, it will also lose competitiveness for future. And we cannot afford that, right? Africa cannot afford that. I would say the world cannot afford that because of the importance of Africa on it, you see? So, yes, I would say definitely we will have to respect those rules. We will have to bring them in, the goals, right? 17 or whatever we will find in the future.
We have to find a way. Say financing is very important in this equation, a very important issue. Are the banks and the international structures ready and willing to invest in what is necessary in order to Africa to make this way towards sustainability?
Okay, so I'll take it from two perspectives, and I think I'll cover finance in one of them. I think the first is I see two roles that they will play. The first is around governance and policy framework. So how do they help with facilitation, ensuring that dialogue happens? The second is around, setting standards. What type of agreements do we need to have in place? What are the protocols of those agreements? So the third is around monitoring and ensuring that those agreements are adhered to, doing research and analysis and supporting capacity development. So that's one side. The second side that I see is three things on those. So the first is trade finance, and I'll explain. Sergio mentioned earlier that there was IFC did a study. I was actually a panel when that report was being launched last year in Washington. They did a study of 4 West African countries, the largest Nigeria, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana. Now, what they found out was that, number one, 1 in 4 of every of those requests have been turned down because either they were to SMEs that didn't have security, they didn't have access to finance, and therefore the banks couldn't do it. 2 was that there was also not enough lines. So from a financing perspective, the corresponding banks, all right, were not willing. And obviously what happened with Africa is that if there is any small mishap, the correspondents just fold their bags and leave Africa. And that's why, that's why I said we Africans have to develop Africa ourselves by not waiting for, because any small mishap, you just find, people up and go. So I think, so that's very important. Now, what was also very interesting in that report is that we also only export lots of commodities. And how do we also ensure that, we transform the type of export that we do in Africa so that we can add more value and actually, capture value, because we're not capturing enough value. And that's why if you look at our businesses, our GDP to our growth rate is slower than because we need to capture more value in Africa. I think the second point is around project finance. I think we've spoken a lot. There are many projects in Africa looking for funding, and it's not for free, all right? They will yield results. They will yield results for whoever wants to. There is energy, transportation, infrastructure, housing. I mean, many more, for us to. I think the last point is around the fact that the FDI, FPI inflow into Africa. And I'm going to ask, so where is the Europe Silk Road strategy? If you go to, I think I went to Kenya 2 years ago. When I went last year, the Chinese had done the Mombasa Road through concession arrangement. How is Europe doing that for parts of Africa? So that we can start to see how this is working, a very clear strategy, a very aggressive strategy in terms of supporting the growth and development. Like I said, it's It's not for free. There's opportunity. We are a youthful continent. We're hardworking. We are intelligent. Just so I think there's a lot that can be done. I just think that there has to be clear strategy and focus, and it's not just. I know that the EU and the AU said there is a 2030 agenda where they're going to put in 150 billion in education, health, and investment. When is this going to start? How is it going to work? So those things have to be clearly articulated, and we start to see the action plans.
So that's very interesting, Luis, and it's been mentioned before, because it's not already a matter of helping, of well-being, Luis. It's now a matter of getting return on investments. So, Luis, how can we ensure that the companies that invest in Africa will take something in the end of the day, and that they will be in African countries as they are in European countries? And so how can the trade take a step forward?
A couple of reflections on that note. So first is, people here are entrepreneurs, businessmen. That nothing is for sure. So also in Africa, nothing is for sure as well. So you do need to take your own risks, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Now, what is important, and I think it was mentioned here already, it's that indeed a lot of the projects are not bankable. That you've heard this word, bankable project, means that for the return that they provide, the risk is not enough. So I do think that some of the things that were mentioned here already are critical. They're talking about concessional finance, talking about use of grants, all of these things that would reduce the risk, and therefore make those projects a bit more bankable, and provide so that the private sector then flows, because that's where transformation is going to happen, when the private sector actually engages. Because we know that public sector is very important, all of the government's fundings is very important. If it's limited in places like Europe and the US, can we imagine the limitations it has in Africa? So it's critical that the private sector actually is brought in, and some of those measures are really important for the attractiveness of those projects to happen. I would just give you another idea. When we were talking about, I think it was our president saying, okay, what can be done tomorrow, blah blah blah, and I'll give you an idea for the ambassador to take to the EU, which is, we were talking about, how to fund this and how to create. I think parts in Africa, we need to create new commodities, and we in our firm, we are true believers that carbon credits might be a new commodity for Africa, now. And I think it was President Ruto from Kenya, I think not long ago, he made a proposal that we found very interesting, which is that at this point we are fighting, what is a global problem. Obviously it's a global problem with local solutions. So we are paying whatever the Scandinavians, $10,000 for them to buy Teslas, or whatever, each Scandinavian, whatever are we paying, or subsidizing that, so that you get some carbon credits in Scandinavia for offsetting emissions in Scandinavia, the same thing in Germany, so on and so forth. Why not create a global market of this? And because a ton of CO2 that is offset anywhere. It doesn't really matter if it's Scandinavia or if it's in DRC. And if for you to offset a ton of CO2, at least this is the numbers that my colleagues did, so I'm not sure, I hope that they are right, but they are striking. So if to offset a ton of CO2 in DRC, in deforestation, costs 10% of the average to offset a ton of CO2 in deforestation elsewhere in the globe, why should not we be actually accepting those carbon credits and paying for those countries to then fund their own energy transitions and all of that stuff? So I know it's complex. I would say that, but then the taxpayer in Norway is going to know that. Of course, it's not easy. Otherwise, it will have been done already. You see what I mean? But that's why we are here, to actually address some of these complex, quite complex programs. So, suggestion to take to the EU.
They're working on it. The Vice President of the European Commission is working on it.
Thank you.
Just to simplify.
That will be a massive. That will be a massive.
So we take something from here. Actually, investing in Africa is not a matter of goodwill. We all need Africa to develop. And thank you all for being here with us and sharing your views. Florencio, Antonio, Sei, and Luis, thank you so much. Thank you everyone that has been with us.